Here are some more aspects of heroism as shown in Homer's Iliad. So make sure again as you're going through this that you're noting down these key characteristics of a Greek hero and how these examples illustrate them. Firstly, a hero had to be publicly recognised. If no one noticed everything that he did, then your efforts to earn glory were pointless. The idea was that you'd be spoken about after your death. So, as well as being talked about, you needed to get tangible rewards that were evidence for your great deeds. So this took two forms normally. The first one would be armor that you would strip from the bodies of your opponents after you've killed them in battle. And the second was the idea of prizes and loot, which is the geras. And remember that a geras could be a person as well, it wasn't necessarily a thing. So firstly, looking at stripping the body, we have lots of examples in the Iliad of soldiers taking and heroes taking armor off the men that they'd killed in battle to kind of show that they had killed them and therefore prove their glory. So here we have a description of the Lapiths who were fighting on the Greek side, taking armor off the Trojans. And then we see that after Hector kills Patroclus, he takes Achilles' armor off him and puts it on. So it's very important to take the armor from the person you've killed, and Hector actually gets his Trojans to take his armor back to Troy because he's putting on Achilles' special armor. And he promises that if he wins against Achilles in battle, he's going to take his armor. He says, I'll strip you of your famous armor, but he does promise that he will leave the corpse alone, which we'll talk about in a bit more detail later. And after Achilles kills Hector, he takes his armor off him, so he removes the blood-stained arms from his shoulders. The other sorts of prizes you can get would be sort of loot. And so as they're invading territories around the Greek world, you would take precious possessions from them to show that you defeated them. So it's so important that you have that physical recognition of your glory that Agamemnon, that's why he takes Briseis off Achilles, because now that he doesn't have Chryseis, it's not fair. And he says, I will be the only one without a prize. That cannot be right. He, as the leader of the Greeks, should have that physical sign of recognition. And the whole big argument between Agamemnon and Achilles stems from the fact that Agamemnon took Achilles' allotted Geras, the girl Briseis, from him, and that because it's been taken away from him, lowers his status in the eyes of his peers. So Achilles is very angry that he's been robbed of his prize. He describes it as a hard-earned prize that's been given to him by the army, and to him that is an insult. It's not fair, and it's a huge disrespect that he's willing to step out of battle for. He also describes how the Greeks distribute the treasure gathered in war, that when Achilles has all these victories, he's conquered 12 towns by sea and 11 by land. He's won a magnificent haul of treasure, but he complains that he gives it back to Agamemnon, and Agamemnon gives some bits to his men but keeps most of it to himself, and he thinks that that's not fair, that he's won these prizes but he doesn't get to keep them. Another important aspect of heroism in the Homeric world is that they should be respectful. And so they lived by a code of heroism which dictated how heroes should behave both at home and on the battlefield. And so Achilles' conflict with Agamemnon comes from the fact that he feels disrespected by the king. And he speaks very emotionally about this. He's utterly shameless. He calls him a dog. He has cheated me and played me false. He is so furious at him that he says, I hate his gifts when Agamemnon sends the embassy to try and convince him to come back, and he values him as much as a splinter. Conversely, a hero had to be a good host and a good guest, because that shows respect to your fellow man and your fellow heroes. So when the embassy comes from Agamemnon, those 3 men sent by him to try and convince Achilles to come back, before he even asks what they want, why they're there, he says to Patroclus to bring out a big bowl, give every man a cup of strong wine, and he welcomes them as his friends, even though he's in a bad mood, because that is the code of heroism. And so they depart from his tent respectfully. And again, they mention his obligations as a host and the power of being under his roof. Another part of this respect is the idea of treating your fellow heroes nobly on the battlefield. You kill them in a good way, but you shouldn't be cruel. And so Hector illustrates this when he speaks to Achilles before their duel, and he says that, I want to fight you man to man, kill you or be killed. That is a noble way to die and a noble way to fight. He promises that he won't violently maltreat you. He's just going to take his armor and give him up to the Greeks. And he hopes that Achilles will do the same. But it emphasizes how angry Achilles is at the death of Patroclus that he goes against this. So he actually mutilates Hector's body, and he tells him he's going to do this before he does. So he says that he'd be quite happy to cut Hector up and eat you raw myself. But he's not going to do that. Instead, he's going to make sure that he is eaten by dogs, his corpse. So he's so angry that he's not willing to obey this code of heroism and respect Hector's body after he kills him. We also see that it's kind of linked to that. It's important that after death you have a proper funeral and a burial. And we see a lot of concern from the heroes in the Iliad that they won't be buried properly. So Achilles is really worried that Patroclus's body is going to rot before he can have a funeral. He doesn't want flies to defile his friend. And he is upset that the men killed by Hector are still lying mangled out on the plain. They haven't been buried properly. They have quite a negative view of the afterlife. Hector refers to it as evil death, and so therefore it's important that they have the right kind of funeral and burial processes, as we'll see in the Aeneid, so that they can go there. And so Hector begs Achilles to return his body to the Trojans so that they can cremate his body properly and so he can be treated properly. So make sure that you've got a good list of these characteristics of a Homeric hero, and then how these examples illustrate them. So it's going to be really useful to compare to Aeneas and what a Roman hero is like. But I also want to make sure that you've got this for when we do our second internal. Good luck.